They tied a red ribbon to his stall, so buyers would skip him. His front hoof curled wrong, like it remembered every kick it took. She wasn't looking for a horse, just a place to cry where no one would ask. But the colt stared at her until she couldn't leave. They tied a red ribbon to his gate, so buyers wouldn't waste time. It meant broken. It meant don't bother. The colt stood behind the slats with a leg curled like it had learned to limp before it learned to run. He didn't whinny or stomp. He just stood there, thin as wind, looking at nothing. May wasn't there to buy a horse. She was sent to town for sacks of oats and a new stirrup strap. Her father hadn't come into town since her brother's accident, and now he barely spoke unless it was about what was missing. The feed yard sat behind the auction barn, where the colts too young, too wild, or too hurt got penned and forgotten. May had passed it 100 times without stopping. But that day, she turned her head, and the colt was already watching her. The way he stood didn't seem right, like he was waiting on something that should have happened already. She walked past the other pens, past the loud ones rearing and begging. He didn't move when she stepped close. His eyes were dull like river stone, but they didn't blink. The curled leg looked worse up close, like it had been twisted and mended wrong. The ribbon was knotted twice on the gate. A tag dangled from the knot. It said unfit in black chalk. She hated how familiar the word felt. She crouched near the fence, didn't speak, just looked. The colt's ears flicked, but he didn't flinch. Behind her, a ranch hand barked orders and kicked gravel, loading up yearlings that had fetched a fair price. The sun burned the air flat. Her shirt stuck to her shoulders, but she stayed. Her brother used to say animals knew things, knew people better than they knew themselves. The colt dropped his head slowly. One hoof scraped once against the dirt. Not pain, a gesture, almost like memory. A bell rang out from the main barn, calling folks for the next round. She was supposed to go. She didn't. She leaned close to the pen and watched him limp to one corner, avoiding a patch of dirt like it carried heat. He circled around it instead of over it. Twice, she looked down and saw nothing but hard ground. No glass, no thorns, no waste, just ordinary earth. But the colt refused to touch it. She came back the next day, this time with an apple in her pocket. The store clerk gave her a look when she asked if the colt was still unsold. That thing, he snorted, ain't no one gonna take that mess. Some say it ain't right in the bones. Others say it remembers too much. She didn't answer. She just waited until he nodded and waved her off. Suit yourself. Just don't come crying when it won't stand for saddling. When she stepped up to the pen again, the colt turned before she called. He walked over, slow, careful, each step deliberate like he was measuring the world. She held out the apple. He didn't take it, just pressed his nose against her wrist for a breath, then stepped back. It wasn't trust. It was something older. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her father was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with his back to the window. The house was too quiet, too clean. Her brother's boots still sat by the back door. His belt hung over the window frame, untouched since the rodeo. She thought about taking it down. She didn't. Instead, she went to the barn. She brought the colt home the next morning, paid with what little she'd saved. Hid him in the back stall that no one used anymore, the one with the broken latch and the patch of shadow that never dried out. She wrapped his leg and laid hay that didn't smell like mildew. He didn't whinny. He just stood there like he understood he was a secret. She called him Trace. He didn't respond to the name, didn't respond to much. But when she brought out her brother's old curry brush and held it in her hand without moving, Trace took one step forward. Just one. The next evening, she burned a pile of broken gear, frayed reins, a cracked bit, the snapped saddle horn from the fall. She tossed in the belt, too. Couldn't look at it anymore. The leather curled as the fire caught. She turned away before it finished. But in the morning, Trace stood at the stall's edge, muzzle down. Something brown and scorched lay at his feet. The belt. He had dragged it back from the ash heap and laid it in her path. She stared at it, then at him. He looked away. She didn't touch the belt. She didn't touch him. She just sat on the stall floor, while the colt rested his head on the gate and listened to the wind. The red ribbon still hung from his old auction gate. She untied it and folded it into her pocket. Maybe it didn't mean broken. Maybe it meant chosen. Trace began to follow her, without being called. Every morning when May opened the barn, he'd already be standing at the gate, silent, waiting. He never made noise, never begged, just walked behind her with that slow, limping gait, like his body knew better than to rush. He wouldn't go near the other horses, not even to drink. If one got close, he'd back away, quiet and patient, like he didn't belong to their kind. She tried walking him around the paddock once, but he refused to cross a certain patch of dirt. Same spot every time. She tried leading him over it, sweet-talking him, even tugging gently. He'd dig his good hoof into the earth and not move, not from fear, from something else, like memory, like grief. May didn't tell her father about Trace. She fed him the shadows, brushed him after chores, and kept the stall clean so the old man wouldn't notice. The ranch was quiet now, stripped of all the noise it once had. No laughter in the mornings, no hammering, no late-night guitar. Her father barely left the porch. When he did, he walked past the barn like it was a place someone else built. He hadn't spoken her brother's name since the funeral, and he sure as hell didn't ask why May came in late or why she had hay in her sleeves. She wasn't sure if he didn't know, or just didn't want to. One morning, Trace wasn't in his stall. Panic hit her so fast her hands went numb. She ran out barefoot, heart thudding hard. But he wasn't gone. He was standing in the old round pen, the one where her brother used to train green colts, back when the ranch still had money and hope. The gate had been locked for months. She never opened it. But there Trace stood, inside, unmoving, like he'd always belonged there. The wind picked up. Dust curled. May looked at the latch. It wasn't broken. It had been lifted. She walked toward him, whispering his name, unsure if it mattered. The colt turned his head slowly, eyes darker than any storm. He stepped once aside, toward the far fence. That's when she saw it. The spot where her brother fell. The blood was long gone. The dust healed over, but the memory was buried deep in her body. She hadn't set foot in that ring since. Trace walked to that exact place and lowered his head. Then he stepped around it, just like he'd done with the earth patch before. May's chest burned. She tried to breathe, but couldn't. He knew. Later that week, she found him standing at the side fence again, staring down the pasture. His ears were fixed forward, tail still, body tight. She stepped beside him, squinting into the sun. Nothing there. No movement. No threat. But Trace didn't relax. He stayed that way for hours, watching, waiting. When she finally led him back to the barn, he resisted at first, turning his head one last time toward the hills, like something out there still lingered, something she couldn't see. That night, the wind hit harder, a dry, electric storm rolled in, flashing against the sky in blue bursts. Most of the horses spooked, bucked and snorted. Trace didn't move. He stood calm in the stall while the others screamed. When a bolt lit the hills, he turned his head sharply. The next morning, she followed his gaze again to the dead cottonwood by the creek, burned from the roots, blackened and hollow. Her brother had carved his name into that tree once. It still showed faintly beneath the ash. May hadn't gone near it in a year, but now she did, just stood beside it, breathing slow, while Trace waited behind her. Back at the barn, something else changed. Trace began digging, small at first, one hoof scraping at the straw in short, rhythmic strokes, always in the same corner. May let him do it. On the third day, his hoof hit something hard. She knelt and pulled it out, a stirrup, old, rusted, and bent at the edge. Her breath caught. It was her brother's. He'd lost it the day of the fall. No one ever found it. She didn't know how it ended up buried here, in Trace's stall. Maybe someone tossed it. Maybe Trace brought it. She didn't ask. She just held it in both hands and sat in the straw until her arms went numb. Her father noticed the next morning. "You been in the barn again?" His voice didn't carry anger, just tiredness. May shrugged. "Just cleaning." He didn't press. But that evening, he stood near the barn longer than usual. Didn't come in. Just looked toward the gate and then turned away. As the days passed, Trace became more restless. He followed May tighter, closer. If she walked toward the old fence, he stepped in front of her. If she got too near the firewood stack, where her brother used to sit and carve shapes into the posts, Trace would block her path. She didn't understand. Not fully, but it didn't feel random. It felt like protection. She started dreaming again. In the dreams, she was riding. Dust flew up behind her, crowd cheering. But when she looked down, she wasn't on a horse she recognized. It was Trace, but he wasn't limping. He was running, strong and clean. In the dream, she smiled. She stopped telling herself it was a coincidence, that he was just a broken horse with strange habits. She started believing he knew something, maybe not in the way people did, maybe deeper, older. Trace didn't speak, but every day he told her more. The whispers started in town before May realized how many eyes were on her. It began with a passing joke at the feed store. A rancher leaned over the counter, thumb tracing a coffee ring, and said, "That's the one, ain't it? The girl with the busted colt. Heard he follows her like a dog." The clerk laughed, low and short, but his eyes lingered. She bought him from the back pens. Should have been sent to slaughter, that one. Ain't natural, the way he watches folk. May didn't say a word, just kept her head down, coins in her hand. But the heat on the back of her neck followed her out the door like a hand that wouldn't let go. By the time she reached the ranch, Trace was already waiting at the fence. He stood perfectly still, tail unmoving, ears trained on her approach like he'd known exactly when she'd return. She didn't tie him anymore. He never wandered. He moved only when she did. That evening, she brushed him longer than usual. Her hands moved slow, and he leaned into the strokes like he'd missed them. When the brush passed near the old scar above his left shoulder, he flinched, just once. May paused. Beneath the fur, a ridge of bone pushed oddly against her palm, like something had broken long ago and healed wrong. She didn't ask. She didn't want to imagine what hands had done it. Later, she overheard her father on the porch talking with an old ranch hand. The man had come to borrow fence wire, but the conversation veered. "That creek's bad land," the ranch hand said, chewing a stem of grass. "Lightning's hit that same cottonwood 3 times. You ever hear of such a thing? Tree won't die neither, just stands there black and mean." Her father didn't answer. The old man spat into the dirt. "And that colt of hers? Carter swears it was born the night the flood came. Says he found the mare dead, and that thing standing over her, still wet, not making a sound." May leaned against the inside wall, her breath caught. The porch went quiet. Then the man added, "Folks say the flood wasn't right. Took the cattle, took the dogs, left only that horse." Her father's voice came then, low and sharp. "Don't bring that here." The next morning, Trace refused a drink from the main trough. May had filled it herself. Fresh water. Nothing off. But he backed away, curling his lip like something smelled wrong. He walked instead toward the far fence, past the pens, toward the path that led down to the creek. She followed, unsure why. He didn't walk fast. Just steady, like a line being drawn across memory. When they reached the edge, Trace stopped. May stepped beside him. The cottonwood stood black and broken, just like they'd said. Carved into bark, faint but still visible, was her brother's name. Just 5 letters. Nothing else. Trace walked in a half-circle around the tree, never past its shadow. She looked down and noticed something small at her feet, A horseshoe, rusted nearly through, nailed into a scrap of wood. It wasn't from their ranch. She turned it over, carved faintly into the back. Keep what remembers. May held it, without knowing why it mattered. Trace exhaled, long and slow, then turned back up the path without waiting. That evening, she left the horseshoe on the barn shelf. Trace watched her do it. She didn't know if he understood, but his body relaxed when she let it go. The next few days brought more whispers. A boy at the supply yard swore he saw the Colt pacing in circles at midnight, outside May's window. Didn't make no sound, he told a group of men. Just walked in slow loops, like it was waiting for something bad. A woman in town claimed her chickens wouldn't roost after the Colt walked past her fence. Spooked him so bad, one laid an egg on my boot. People laugh, but only a little. The kind of laughter that wants to chase off fear. A little louder than needed, a little too forced. May stayed quiet, but Trace changed. He began to move differently, not just limping less, but watching more. Every sound drew his eyes. Every breeze sent his ears flicking. He no longer backed from the other horses. He stood still, and they backed away from him. One gelding reared when Trace passed too close, eyes wide, sweat breaking out like he'd seen something else entirely. May started sleeping in the hayloft near the barn. She didn't say why, just told herself it was in case Trace needed anything. But really, she just felt safer near him. One night, she woke to a sound like hooves on stone. Not running, not stomping, just slow steps. She looked out the loft window. Trace was gone from his stall. Panic twisted her gut. She threw on her coat and rushed out barefoot. She didn't need to look far. Trace stood in the rodeo ring, alone. The moon caught the edge of his mane like silver threads. He wasn't moving, just standing in the same spot her brother had fallen. Not on it, near it, facing it. May walked to the fence and leaned over it, breast shallow. A wind passed through the valley, soft and cold. And for one moment, she swore she heard her brother's voice, low and broken, carried by the trees. He knows. Trace turned to her slowly, then walked away from the center, his limp more visible under the moonlight. May followed him back to the barn, without a word. She didn't try to understand it. She only knew that the Colt wasn't just a Colt anymore. He was a witness, a keeper of something no one else remembered, something the creek had left behind. The air changed before the storm arrived. Not in the sky, but in the horses. They grew restless, moving without rhythm, swishing their tails at wind that hadn't come yet. Even the old gelding who never spooked began tossing his head, chewing his bit down to metal. But Trace stayed still. He stood in his stall, watching the hills through the cracks in the barn, as if he knew exactly when the storm would break and what it might take with it. May felt it too. It started as a tightness in her chest every time she walked past the rodeo flyer tacked to the fence post. One wild card slot. Any horse. Any rider. No name required. Just courage. The paper flapped in the rising wind, the ink already fading from sun and dust. She read it every morning, then turned away. Trace began pacing that week. Not fast, not frantic. Just a slow, thoughtful circle in the back pasture. He stopped eating the moment thunder rolled over the hills. Didn't spook. Just stood still like he was listening for something deeper inside it. May sat with him under the overhang, brushing the mud from his mane. She whispered, "It's just weather," but the words didn't settle because it didn't feel like weather. It felt like waiting. One evening, she found the saddle, her brother's saddle. She hadn't touched it in a year, hadn't even looked at it. But there it was, laid gently across the fence rail near the barn, cleaned, oiled, every leather stitch smooth like it had never been broken. No one had touched it. Not her, not her father. The stirrups were already adjusted to her length. She reached out, fingertips brushing the horn. Trace stepped forward and rested his head on the saddle, as if offering himself. She pulled her hand away. That night, the storm finally came. It didn't rage. It pulsed, slow, heavy, deliberate. The kind of storm that doesn't want to scare you. It wants to test you. Lightning arced across the distant creek, illuminating the cottonwood like a skeleton caught mid-scream. The thunder followed second behind. Inside the barn, Trace didn't move. He stood, facing the wind, ears locked forward. May sat on a hay bale, heart pounding in rhythm with the sky. She couldn't sleep, couldn't look away from the saddle. In the early hours, she stepped outside. The wind had stilled, but the smell of wet earth lingered. Rain clung to her skin. She walked barefoot to the rodeo gate and leaned against it. The post was damp, the metal latch cold. Something had changed. She didn't know what, just that it was time. The next morning, she signed the form. The man at the booth barely glanced at her, just handed her a number and waved her on. No questions, no judgment, but others noticed. When she led Trace into the warm-up area, heads turned, whispers followed. "Ain't that the lame Colt?" someone muttered. "She's gonna ride that." Another laughed. "He won't make it 10 steps." Trace didn't flinch. His limp was still there, but lighter now, more memory than wound. May saddled him in silence. She tied her brother's red ribbon around the horn, not as a warning, as a promise. She mounted slowly. The weight of the saddle fit, like it had always been hers. Trace shifted beneath her, steady as breath. When the announcer called her number, a hush fell across the arena. May squeezed her hands around the reins. Trace stepped forward, alone. Behind the gate, time slowed. Dust drifted in sunlight. The wind stilled. The old gatekeeper looked at her with an unreadable face, then opened the latch. The gate swung wide. Trace walked through. No stumble, no falter. Just one clean, silent stride into the arena. The world narrowed. The crowd blurred. Only the barrels remained, and the stretch of dirt that had taken her brother. Trace saw it. He remembered. His ears flattened, muscles tightened. May didn't command him. She just let go. He ran. Not fast at first. Careful, thoughtful, like measuring the way of the earth. Then faster. The limp vanished in dust. Hooves pounded in rhythm, sharp and sure. May leaned into him, eyes stinging. They rounded the first barrel smooth as a stream bed curve. The second came tighter, faster. She heard the crowd shift, whispers rising. The third barrel waited in the place she feared most. Trace slowed by a breath. A half step, then veered, not wide, but just enough, avoiding the place where it happened. He remembered. He had carried her away from it. Even now, the last stretch opened in front of them like a wound healing. Trace burst through it. The buzzer screamed. Silence. The crowd held its breath. Then a voice shouted, "She did it!" Another screamed, "Fast as time." May pulled Trace to a slow stop. Dust clung to her cheeks like tears. Trace stood still, chest heaving, ears forward. He turned once toward the fence, toward the empty spot where her brother always stood. And there, hanging from the gatepost, was the rodeo belt. It hadn't been there when she rode out. No one saw who put it there. Trace lowered his head. May slid from the saddle, legs shaking, and pressed her hand to his neck. He had known. All along he had known. The crowd parted like a tide when May walked Trace past the judge's booth. No one stopped her. No one dared. The man with the clipboard lowered his pen. One of the announcers started to speak, then simply tipped his hat and stepped back. The whole arena seemed quieter than it should have been, like the air itself was listening. May led Trace out of the ring with dust still clinging to her boots. She didn't look up at the scoreboard. She didn't have to. The silence said enough. Behind the fence, Trace stood tall despite the old limp, ears flicking toward every sound but eyes steady only on her. The red ribbon she had tied to the saddle horn fluttered in the breeze. The belt, her brother's belt, still hung from the gate like it had never left. And no one claimed it. No one touched it. It belonged to Trace now. May reached up and pulled the ribbon loose. It felt heavy now, not with shame, but with memory. A woman near the fence whispered, "Is that the Carter Colt?" Another answered, "Can't be. That one never walked right." A third voice, older, quieter, "My pa said that one came from floodwater and smoke. It ain't just a Colt. That thing remembers." Trace lowered his head and touched May's shoulder gently, as if to bring her back to the moment. She let the ribbon fall to the ground. The dust took it, and she didn't try to catch it. Instead, she turned to face the crowd, and for the first time, she saw her father. He wasn't in the stands. He was near the outer gate, hat off, held in both hands. His boots were still worn, shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbows. The sun caught the gray in his beard, and for the first time in what felt like years, he looked small. Not broken, not angry, just quiet. Their eyes met, and nothing moved for a long time. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. But he stepped forward. Trace didn't move until May did. She took the lead rope and walked slowly toward her father, every footstep pressing deep into the rodeo dirt. The space between them closed one step at a time. No words passed between them when they met. Her father looked at Trace first, not with the suspicion he once carried, not with fear, just wonder, like he was seeing something alive that shouldn't be. Trace stood inches away, still and strong. Her father reached out with one hand, hesitant, slow, and laid it gently on Trace's forehead. The Colt didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned into it. "I watched him run," her father finally said. His voice was dry and thin, but it didn't shake. Just like Clay. May swallowed hard. "He remembered," she said, "where Clay fell. He remembered, and he ran around it." Her father nodded. Maybe he didn't remember. Maybe he just knew. They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. Her father stepped aside and let her pass through the gate, this time holding it open for her. Not as a father, as someone who had seen a ghost and was ready to let it rest. Back at the barn, the sky was starting to turn pink at the edges. Evening settled over the fields. Trace walked ahead now, leading her instead of the other way around. She led him. He didn't go to his stall. He walked to the round pen, the one no horse had entered since the day her brother died. The gate was unlatched. May hadn't touched it. Inside, Trace circled once, not limping, not rushing, just moving with that deep, measured rhythm that no one taught him. He stopped in the center, the exact place her brother had trained all those years. May stood at the edge of the fence, hand resting on the rail, the same place she used to stand with Clay when they were kids, counting hoofbeats and trading stories about champions they'd raise. For a moment, she could almost hear his voice, laughing warm, full of dust and dreams. She looked down and saw something half buried in the dirt. A nail, rusted, bent in a way she recognized. She pulled it free. The old training post had snapped there once, long ago. Her brother had tried to fix it with fence wire and stubbornness. It never held. She placed the nail in her pocket. Without thinking, Trace walked toward her, head low. She opened the gate, and he followed her out without needing a lead. Together, they walked to the fence line where the ranch met the sky. Her father stood there again, this time not alone. A few neighbors had followed, keeping their distance. One boy held out an apple, but was too afraid to step forward. May gave a soft nod, and Trace approached the boy gently, like wind brushing candle. He took the apple without hurry, chewed once, and turned back toward May. That night, May took the red ribbon and tied it around the old saddle, not as a warning, but as a sign, a thread of memory that no longer hurt. She hung her brother's belt in the barn above Trace's stall. This time it stayed. As the sun dropped low and the valley turned gold, Trace stood by the fence, head tilted toward the distant hills. Not waiting, not watching, just still, like a gate that had finally opened and didn't need to close again. They started calling him the Red Ribbon Colt before the week was over. Nobody knew who said it first. Maybe it was the boy who fed him the apple. Maybe the announcer who watched the gate open with his mouth still half formed around a word. Or maybe it was just the town itself, whispering stories the way it always had, folding pain into legend like straw into a bed. The name stuck, not because of the ribbon, but because of what he carried that day. Not just a rider, but the memory of one who couldn't return. May didn't ride him again after the rodeo. Not because he couldn't. He still walked with that slow, proud limp, but it was lighter now, like it was no longer a wound but a reminder. She didn't need to ride, and Trace didn't need to run. What mattered had already happened. The gate had opened, and he'd gone through. People came by the ranch just to see him. Children pressed their faces to the fence, whispering as he walked past. Some brought ribbons of their own, not red, but yellow, blue, white. They tied them to the posts and watched the wind carry them. One girl laid her grandfather's old spur near the stall door and said, "He used to race." Said good horses don't always come pretty. Trace sniffed it, then laid his head on the rail beside her. May kept the barn open after that. Not as a show, not for money, just so the town could come. And they did, quietly, respectfully, like church. Her father sat outside most mornings now, carving wood again. He'd make small things, fence pegs, spoon handles, once a little horse with one crooked leg. He didn't talk about Clay, but he started saying Trace's name. That was enough. One morning, May found the red ribbon on the barn floor, not tied to anything, just resting dusty and soft. She thought about hanging it back on the saddle, but stopped. Instead, she tied it gently to Trace's mane, near his ear. He stood perfectly still. She said nothing. Neither did he. Seasons turned. The tree by the creek finally fell. No storm, no lightning. It just dropped one night, clean and quiet. May walked there with Trace the next morning. They stood together in the hollow, where the roots once clawed the earth. The bark still held the carving. Clay, barely visible, but there. She ran her fingers over it once, then let it go. Trace stepped into the space where the tree had stood and lowered his head. She didn't stop him. The wind felt different after that. Softer, tired. The rodeo fence stayed up, but no one entered the ring again that year. People said it didn't feel right. As at the dust, there still held something it wasn't done giving back. They asked May if she'd enter again next season. She shook her head. We already won. Over time, Trace became something more than a horse. He was a story people told when they thought no one was listening. Remember the colt that ran for the dead boy? He picked his rider, not the other way around. He limped through a miracle. No one mentioned the belt anymore, but some swore it glowed when the sun hit it just right. A journalist came from another county once, wanting to write an article. May didn't say much, just let him see for himself. The man stayed quiet the whole visit, notebook in hand, and before he left, he tied a red ribbon to the gatepost without asking. Trace walked past him once, brushed his hand gently with his nose, then moved on. The article was never published. Years passed. Trace grayed at the muzzle. His limp returned in the winters. But he still walked to the same fence every morning, watched the hills, and waited for nothing. May rode other horses when the ranch needed it, but she always came back to sit with him when the sun was low. She'd lean against the rail, braid his mane with old thoughts, and hum songs her brother used to sing when no one was listening. The belt stayed where she'd hung it, dust gathered around it, but no spider ever wove near it. No bird nested above it. And when storms came through, that wall never leaked. One autumn, a group of young riders came to the ranch, asking to see the red ribbon colt. May pointed to the pasture. "He's there," she said. The kids ran ahead. One came back, confused. "He's not red," the girl said, "and he's not fast." May just smiled. He was never about speed. The sun fell slower that evening. Trace stood by the fence, the ribbon still tied to his mane, faded now to the color of old clay. May leaned her head against his shoulder and closed her eyes. He didn't move. Not once. They say when Trace finally laid down for the last time, he did it in the old ring, quiet, dignified, as if he knew that was where the story had begun and where it should end. May found him there, curled near the gate. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She untied the ribbon, pressed it to her chest, and let the silence wrap around her like arms that still remembered. The town held no funeral. But the next rodeo opened with an empty ring, and a single bell hung from the gate. No words, just a ribbon, and a name no one would forget. Ask ChatGPT.